pink and blue balloons tied to our mailbox, bobbing in the October wind like nothing was wrong. 6 cars I didn't recognize parked along both sides of Whitmore Drive, bumper to bumper, the way they only park when someone's house is the destination. And stretched across our front porch, in letters big enough to read from the end of the block, a hand-painted banner that read, "Welcome, our little miracle." I sat in my rental car at the end of the street and stared at it for a long time. My name is Miles Carver. I'm 39 years old. I'm a pharmaceutical sales manager for a regional company out of Columbus, Ohio, which means I spend roughly 3 weeks out of every month on the road, driving between clinics, scheduling dinner meetings with physicians, living out of a rolling suitcase in hotels that all start to look the same after a while. It's not glamorous work. It pays well, and it keeps the mortgage current on the house at the end of Whitmore Drive. The house with the balloons. I had been in Pittsburgh for 4 days. The meeting that was supposed to stretch through Friday got canceled Thursday morning when the medical director rescheduled without warning. That happens in my business. Doctors cancel things. You adapt. So instead of spending another night eating bad pasta in a hotel bar and watching cable news, I booked an early return flight home, texted nobody, because I wanted to surprise Camille, and landed in Columbus by 2 in the afternoon. I stopped at her favorite bakery on 5th Street and bought a lemon tart. I still remember smiling at the woman behind the counter when she tied the ribbon on the box. Camille, my wife of 7 years, the woman I met at a charity fundraiser when I was 31 and she was 28, who laughed at something I said across a crowded room and turned my entire evening into something worth remembering. We got married on a Saturday in June in a small ceremony outside Granville, Ohio, just family and a few close friends, the kind of wedding neither of us had to recover from financially. 7 years of marriage. And I was sitting at the end of our street holding a lemon tart, staring at a banner welcoming a baby I didn't know existed. Before I tell you what happened when I walked through that door, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand the shape of our marriage, because what I found inside that house didn't happen overnight. And what I did in the hours and days that followed wasn't impulsive. It was the result of everything I'm about to tell you. Camille and I had tried to have children. That's the part that made the banner feel like it was written in a foreign language. We tried for 2 years, starting in the 3rd year of our marriage. The appointments, the medication, the conversations with specialists whose offices always had that particular brand of clinical hopefulness that made everything feel worse, not better. There were 2 pregnancies. Neither lasted past 10 weeks. After the second loss, Camille went quiet in a way I hadn't seen before. Not sad exactly. Quiet, like she'd gone somewhere inside herself and locked the door from the inside. We went to counseling. Dr. Farrell, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s with an office near the Short North neighborhood in Columbus. She helped us, genuinely. But she also said something during one of our sessions that I've thought about every single day since. She said, "Grief doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like distance, and sometimes distance, if it goes unaddressed, becomes permanent." I remembered those words the day Camille told me she wanted to stop trying. It was a Sunday. I was home, which was rare, and we were eating breakfast at the kitchen table. She set down her coffee cup and said it quietly, the way you say something you've rehearsed so many times it's lost its feeling. "I think I need to stop trying, Miles. I think I need to just let it go." And I said okay, because I thought I understood what she needed. And because I was leaving for Detroit the following Monday, and the week after that I'd be in Cincinnati. And somewhere in my mind, I filed it under, "We'll talk about this more when I'm back." But by the time I got back, we had moved on. The way couples move on from things they haven't actually resolved. We just walked around it. We got good at walking around it. That was 14 months before I sat at the end of Whitmore Drive, reading that banner. My wife was a marketing consultant. She worked from home 3 days a week and drove into her firm's Clintonville office the other 2. It was a good setup for her. It meant she had structure but also flexibility. It meant she had colleagues, friendships, a professional identity outside of being my wife, which was important to her, and which I respected, even if I sometimes worried that I didn't know her professional life as well as I should. When you're on the road as much as I am, you miss things, small things, the way a person's mood shifts over the course of a week, the names of new friends, the details. You tell yourself you'll catch up on the details when you get home. I'd been telling myself that for years. I sat in that rental car for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. not sure why I was timing myself, except that my whole body had gone very still, and part of me thought that if I moved too quickly, I would do something I couldn't undo. The cars, 6 of them. I recognized one, a silver Subaru that belonged to Camille's college friend Dana Whitfield, who lived in Bexley and came around for birthdays and the occasional Sunday brunch. The other 5 were strangers. The balloons were pink and blue, both colors, not a gender reveal. Something else. Welcome, our little miracle. I picked up my phone. I almost called her. My thumb was hovering over her name in my contacts, over the contact photo I'd taken of her laughing on the deck of a rented lake house in Put-in-Bay 3 summers ago, before any of this, before whatever this was. I put the phone down. I put the lemon tart on the passenger seat. I got out of the car. The porch steps creaked the way they always do. I've been meaning to fix that second step for 2 years. I heard voices before I reached the door. Women's voices, a burst of laughter, the clinking of glasses. Someone had music playing softly inside. The kind of music you put on when a group of women gather for an afternoon that's supposed to feel intentional and warm. I didn't knock. I used my key. The foyer opened into the living room, and the living room had been transformed. White streamers along the ceiling, a table stacked with wrapped gifts, pink and blue tissue paper spilling out of gift bags. And in the center of it all, sitting in the armchair we'd bought together at a shop in German Village. The armchair we always argued was too big for the room, but neither of us wanted to return, was Camille. She was unmistakably, visibly, approximately 6 months pregnant. The room went silent when they saw me standing in the doorway. Camille's face did something I had never seen it do in 7 years of marriage. Her expression moved through at least 4 different things in less than 2 seconds. Shock, then something that looked briefly like relief, then fear, then a careful, deliberate blankness that she settled into like armor. She said my name. Miles. Just my name. Nothing else. Dana was the first to speak. She stood up from the couch with that particular kind of nervous energy that tells you someone knows more than they're letting on. Miles, hi, we were just... Camille didn't tell us you were... She didn't know I was coming, I said. The other women in the room, 4 of them, names I either didn't know or couldn't access at that moment, were very still. The way people go still when they sense something structural has just shifted and they don't know yet which direction things are going to fall. Can you give us a minute? I asked, and my voice was steady. I was surprised how steady it was. The women moved. I'll give them credit. They read the room. Within 60 seconds, they had gathered their purses and their jackets and filed out through the back door, Dana squeezing Camille's shoulder as she passed, not looking at me. And then it was just us. Camille in the armchair, me in the doorway. Our house arranged around us like a stage set. I looked at her, at the obvious curve of her stomach, at the way she had her hands folded over it, the way pregnant women sometimes do without thinking, like an instinct before it's even fully conscious. How far along? I asked. She looked at me for a long moment. 24 weeks, she said quietly. 6 months. I'd been home 8 days ago. I'd sat at this same kitchen table with a cup of coffee and talked to her about a difficult client in Pittsburgh, and she had nodded and asked follow-up questions, and I had not once in the entire conversation, in the entire visit, noticed. I'm trying to understand, I said, and my voice cracked slightly on the last word, which I hadn't expected. How you are 24 weeks pregnant and I am standing here learning that for the first time. She closed her eyes. Miles? Who knows? She opened them. What? Who knows? Your mother? Dana? People at work? A pause that told me everything before she spoke. Some people. Some people. Miles, please sit down. Let me explain. I didn't sit down. I stayed in the doorway, because something in me understood that if I crossed the floor and sat down, I was entering a different kind of conversation, the kind where you negotiate, where you absorb, where you let the other person reframe what just happened. And I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Is the baby mine? The question came out flat. I hadn't planned to ask it. But it was there between us before I could stop it, and once it was out, I couldn't pretend it hadn't been the loudest question in the room from the moment I saw that banner. Camille looked at me with an expression I still can't fully describe. It wasn't offense. It wasn't even hurt. It was more like exhaustion. Like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just finally set it down, and the putting down of it was almost more overwhelming than the carrying had been. "Yes," she said. "The baby is yours, Miles. Of course the baby is yours." She talked for 45 minutes. I stood in the doorway for the first 10, and then, at some point I don't remember clearly, I moved to the couch and sat down. Not because I had decided to, more like my legs made a decision my brain hadn't approved yet. She had found out she was pregnant in April. She told me that first. April, which meant she'd been carrying this since before the spring. Since before my long run of back-to-back travel in May and June. Since before the weekend we'd spent at her sister Brianna's place in Worthington. Since before a dozen ordinary moments that I was now retroactively re-examining for things I'd missed. She found out in April, and she hadn't told me. She said, "I was afraid." She said, "I didn't know how to tell you. After everything we went through before, after the losses, I needed to be sure this one was going to stay before I told you. And then the weeks kept going, and I kept telling myself next week when you're home, next week, and then it became this thing I was carrying alone, and the longer I carried it alone, the harder it got to say it out loud." She said, "I know that's not fair to you. I know it isn't." She was crying by the time she got to the part about the baby shower. She'd organized it with Dana. A small thing, she said. Just close friends. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this was real, and this was happening. She hadn't told me about it because she'd been planning to call me in Pittsburgh and say, "Come home early. I have something to tell you." But she'd been putting that call off the same way she'd been putting off everything else. And then yesterday the guest list was confirmed, and it was too late to reframe it into something that made logical sense. I listened to all of it. I am not a man who is good at big emotional moments. I've known that about myself for a long time. I process slowly. I get quiet when I should probably speak, and I speak when I should probably stay quiet. It's one of the things Camille used to say about me in the early years of our marriage. Gently. The way you point out a flaw in someone you love because you want things to work, and not because you want to wound. "Miles, you go somewhere inside yourself, and I lose you." I sat on that couch in our rearranged living room surrounded by baby shower decorations I hadn't known were coming, and I went somewhere inside myself, and I tried to understand the difference between a lie and a silence. Because here is what I kept returning to. She had not lied to me. In 7 months of phone calls and visits and ordinary conversations, she had not once said, "I am not pregnant." She had simply never said the other thing. She had let the space between us swallow it whole. And the space between us. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. 3 weeks out of every month, I am not home. 3 weeks out of every month, Camille lives in that house on Whitmore Drive by herself, working, seeing friends, building a life that moves forward without me in it, the way all lives do when the person who's supposed to be there isn't. We talk on the phone. We text. We do the technological approximation of intimacy that couples in my situation convince ourselves is enough. But it isn't enough. I knew that. I had known it for years and filed it, the way I had filed everything else, under "we'll deal with this when I'm home more." Sitting on that couch, I understood for the first time that when I'm home, more might never come. And that Camille, somewhere in the long, quiet months of a pregnancy she was carrying alone, might have understood that before I did. I stayed in the house that night. I want to be clear about that. I want to be clear because in the days that followed, certain people, Camille's mother, her sister Brianna, a few of Dana's well-meaning texts, seemed to construct a narrative in which I had stormed out, abandoned a pregnant woman, put myself before my family. That is not what happened. What happened is that after Camille finished talking, I sat in silence for a while, and then I asked her one question. "Are you happy about this baby?" She looked at me. Her hands were still resting on her stomach. "I'm terrified," she said. "And yes, I'm happy." I nodded. "Okay," I said. And that was enough for that night. I slept in our bed. She slept in our bed. We lay parallel in the dark, and neither of us reached for the other, but neither of us moved to the opposite side of the house. That felt like something. That felt like the marriage choosing to stay in the room even when the people in it weren't sure what to do next. In the morning, I called my manager, Denise, and told her I needed to request a leave modification. 2 weeks at minimum, possibly more. I had unused PTO accumulated from 2 years of canceling vacations for client meetings. Denise was accommodating. She always is. She's the kind of manager who reminds you that the company's flexibility is a benefit, not a favor, and she means it. Then I called my brother Owen, who lives in Akron and has 2 daughters and a marriage that's always seemed steadier than mine in ways I've quietly envied. Owen is 44. He doesn't panic. He is the person I call when I need someone to talk me out of doing something drastic, or talk me into doing something necessary. She kept a pregnancy from you for 6 months, Owen said after I explained everything. Not a question. Just a restatement so I could hear how it sounded out loud. Yeah. Are you angry? I thought about that. I don't know yet. I think I'm more scared than angry. Scared of what? Scared that the reason she didn't tell me, I said slowly, is that she's not sure we're going to make it. Scared that this baby is something she needed without me in it. Scared that she's been building a life in that house that doesn't include me in the way I assumed it did. Owen was quiet for a moment. Have you asked her that? Not yet. Miles, that's the conversation you need to have. He was right. He's almost always right. It's one of his most irritating qualities. We talked for 3 days. Not the careful, surface-level conversation of 2 people trying to avoid conflict. The real kind. The kind where you say things you've been rehearsing inside your head for years without realizing you were rehearsing them. The kind that Dr. Farrell had probably been waiting for us to have since she first saw us in her office 4 years ago. Camille told me she had felt alone for most of our marriage. Not unloved. Alone. That there was a difference between the 2 things, and that she had spent years trying to explain that difference to me in small ways that I had not caught, because I was always halfway to somewhere else. And then she had stopped trying to explain it, and had simply begun to adjust her life around the absence of me in it. She said, when I found out I was pregnant, my first feeling, and I'm ashamed of this, was relief that I would have someone, that I wouldn't be so alone in that house. That landed harder than anything else. Harder than the banner. Harder than the shower. Harder than 6 months of silence. Because what she was describing wasn't a betrayal of me. It was a consequence of something I had built, a life that had made my wife feel so fundamentally alone that the prospect of a baby felt like company. I told her things I hadn't said out loud before, that I had known for years that my travel schedule was damaging us, and had kept telling myself it was temporary, that the next promotion would mean less road time, that things would balance out, that I had used work as a kind of insulation from the harder work of being fully present in a marriage, that losing those 2 pregnancies had broken something in me that I had never fully acknowledged, and that instead of grieving alongside her, I had gone back on the road 2 weeks after the second loss, because a client in Cleveland needed me, and Camille hadn't asked me not to go. She looked at me when I said that. I didn't ask you not to go because I thought you needed to. I needed you to ask me, I said. I know that's not fair, but I needed permission to stay. We were at the kitchen table when we had that conversation. The lemon tart from the bakery on 5th Street was on the counter, still in the box with the ribbon. I had forgotten to put it in the refrigerator and it was probably no longer good, but neither of us had moved it. It had become something else by then. A small artifact of the version of that afternoon I had imagined before I turned onto Whitmore Drive. We started marriage counseling the following week. Not Dr. Farrell. I think we both needed someone new, someone without 4 years of our previous history in their notes. We found a therapist named Dr. Aaron Briggs, who worked out of a practice in Grandview Heights. He was straightforward, unhurried, and within 15 minutes of our first session had identified something with a precision that felt almost surgical. He said, Miles, Camille, what I'm hearing is that you've each developed a very high tolerance for managing things alone. You've both learned to handle difficulty in solitude, and you've both mistaken that for resilience. But what it's actually done is train you not to need each other, and a marriage cannot survive not being needed. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about my father, who worked construction his whole life and never once in my memory asked anyone for help with anything, who managed every hardship with a tight jaw and a longer work week. I thought about how I had always understood that as strength. Dr. Briggs was telling me it was just another kind of distance. The baby is a boy. Camille told me that on the 4th night, not with ceremony, just quietly, after dinner, the way you tell someone something you've been saving. She handed me the ultrasound image, the one she'd been keeping in the drawer of her nightstand, and I held it under the kitchen light and looked at the grainy gray shape of a person I had not yet met. I'm not someone who cries easily. I can count on one hand the times I've cried as an adult. But I stood there in my kitchen holding that image, and something inside me, some tightly held thing that had been in place since the second miscarriage, since the drive home from the specialist's office on a Tuesday in February 4 years ago, when Camille stared out the passenger window the whole way, and I stared straight ahead at the road, and neither of us said a word. That thing came loose. I set the ultrasound down on the counter and put my face in my hands and cried in a way I hadn't since I was young enough not to be embarrassed by it. Camille came and stood beside me and put her arm around my shoulders and didn't say anything. That was the moment the marriage decided something. I don't know how else to describe it. Some marriages have a moment like that, a hinge point, where both people feel the weight of what they've almost lost, and that weight becomes something they choose to carry together instead of separately. We had that moment in our kitchen, over an ultrasound image and a ruined lemon tart. I called Denise the following Monday and told her I was resigning from the field position. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Miles, that's a significant decision. Have you thought about—" "For years," I said. "I've thought about it for years." There was a lateral move available inside the company. A regional training coordinator role, office-based, Columbus, predictable hours. I'd been offered it 18 months ago and turned it down because the pay cut was 8%, and I'd told myself Camille and I were comfortable and the timing wasn't right. The timing was never going to be right. I understood that now. The timing is a story you tell yourself while the actual life is happening somewhere else. The training coordinator role was still open. I took it. Owen called me the same evening, somehow already knowing. Our mother had texted him. "So you're staying home," he said. "I'm staying home." "How does that feel?" I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard, at the maple tree that drops half its leaves directly onto the deck every October, and that I've been meaning to trim for 3 years. At the second porch step that still creaks. At all the small things that accumulate in a house when the person who's supposed to maintain them is always somewhere else. "It feels like something I should have done a long time ago," I said. "But it also feels like exactly the right time." There's a particular kind of grief that comes with realizing you have been the author of your own loss. It doesn't announce itself cleanly. It arrives slowly, in small recognitions, a moment at the dinner table where you understand that the silence you mistook for comfortable companionship was actually two people who had stopped reaching for each other. A night driving home from a client meeting where you realize you're relieved that the trip ran long because home requires something from you that the road does not. That grief is different from the grief of losing something outside your control. It's heavier in some ways, because it carries the weight of all the different places where the story could have changed. I spent a lot of the weeks after that October afternoon sitting with that grief. Not wallowing in it, Dr. Briggs was clear about the distinction, but not running from it either, letting it show me what it needed to show me. What it showed me was this. Camille had not broken our marriage. Neither had I exactly. We had both been so afraid, of loss, of need, of the kind of vulnerability that comes with fully depending on another person, that we had kept leaving each other in the most ordinary ways, over and over, until the leaving had become the relationship. The banner wasn't a betrayal. The banner was a woman who had learned to celebrate alone because the person who was supposed to celebrate with her was always somewhere between Columbus and Cleveland with a rolling suitcase and a quarterly sales target. That understanding didn't make everything simple, but it made everything true. Our son was born on a Tuesday in January, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, in the labor and delivery ward at Ohio Health Riverside Methodist Hospital. Camille's sister Brianna was in the waiting room. Owen had driven down from Akron with his wife, Tamara. I was in the room. I was there for all of it. When the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, this small, furious, extraordinary person who smelled like something I had no word for, I looked at Camille across the room, exhausted and magnificent, and I thought about the lemon tart. I thought about the banner. I thought about 11 minutes sitting at the end of Whitmore Drive while my whole life was rearranging itself 30 yards ahead of me. We named him Elliot. Elliot James Carver. We are not a perfect family. We are a family that came very close to being a collection of two people living in the same house, each privately certain that the other one was managing fine. We are a family that required a moment of total, startling rupture to understand what we actually needed from each other. But we are a family. The second porch step still creaks. I fixed the first one last week. I'll get to the second one. I'm not going anywhere. This is one of the most haunting lessons in presence versus provision. Miles thought he was a good husband because he kept the mortgage current and the bank account full. He didn't realize that while he was busy selling to doctors, he was losing his seat at the table of his own life. The banner wasn't a betrayal, it was a symptom. Camille didn't hide the pregnancy because she was malicious. She hid it because she had literally unlearned how to need him. When a woman starts celebrating her miracle without the father in the room, it means the father has been missing for a long time. The takeaway? Success is worthless if you aren't there to witness it. Miles didn't just come home to a baby. He came home to the realization that he was a stranger in his own house. It took a total rupture for him to realize that being a provider is not the same as being a partner. He didn't just save his marriage, he finally decided to move back into it.